G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle. Today we're going to have a look at, again, the draft and look at some options for us to trade back in. Now I think, if I had to guess, this is more likely going to be a live trade scenario, so that makes it a little bit harder to plot exactly how it's going to go down. If you've missed it, the last two videos I've done on this channel have been looking at pick 12 in isolation and then again pick 26 in isolation, and look at 7 or 8 targets for each pick as to who West Coast could recruit with those picks, who is suited to our needs at the moment, bearing in mind between now and the draft, that's probably going to change. The public perception of where players are going to be available will change, so I will continue to do videos on that. So for a start, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of that. But of course, if you want to see those picks in isolation, go check out those videos. So this video is about trying to get an extra pick in this year's draft. Later today, I'm going to do 2 videos today because I missed one yesterday. Later today, I'm going to go through our list changes, look at potential delisted free agents and the mechanics of exactly how many picks we can take and how many we want to take. But as I currently sit with it, given we hold 12, 26 and 73, and 73 may or may not become Malachi champion, I reckon we want a 4th pick in there as well. So in today's video, we're going to highlight some options of how we can get into it. As you would know by now, if you've been following the trade period and the West Coast Eagles in particular, we hold a very strong 2025 draft hand. So to be specific, so this is what our picks would be if the ladder finished in exactly the same way, which is almost impossible. You know, there's like 6.4 quadrillion different ways the ladder can map out every year. 6.4 quadrillion, look that up. But anyway, we're really just talking about where we finish and where Hawthorn finishes. So if Hawthorn finish 6th again, they finished 7th, but they won a final. So their first pick is 12 and we finish bottom 3. The picks will be ballpark in the same range. So we would hold 3, 12, 21, 30, 39, and 48. So there's a couple of different theories as to why we've loaded up into that draft. First of all, it was kind of the only deal we could get done with Tom Barras after Hawthorn traded with Carlton. People also suggesting we're holding onto those picks to trade for Chad Warner in the future. But we have publicly said through Don Pike and Matthew Clark, we will live trade into this year's draft as well, or at least try to. But I guess there's no guarantee it'd be one of our first rounders next year. So it's possible that we're holding on to, say, 3 and 12 next year in a bid to try and get Chad Warner. Just as a side note, I can't help but be a little worried about us having an amazing draft hand to trade for Chad Warner, because you just look at the trend of how trades happen for, good players, and sometimes clubs, like in the Bulldogs and Geelong scenario this year with Bailey Smith, sometimes clubs are just forced to trade the best assets that they have and the other team just has to cop it. So the fact that we are loading up for next year and getting, say, picks 3, 12 and 21, it makes me a little bit nervous. West Coast is just going to hand over everything we have. Can't help but be a little bit worried about the way West Coast do trades. But anyway, I suppose it's entirely possible West Coast are going to hold their first rounders next year and avoid trading them into this year's draft. But we could trade our future 21, 30, 39 or 48. There's nothing to suggest we're trying to get into the first round of this year's draft. So it makes it interesting and it opens up some different options for us to try and do that. I still think, getting another pick between 20 and 40 in this year's draft would be pretty handy, especially if it allows us to pick a tall defender. In yesterday's video, when I isolated pick 26, I really wanted, in theory, to pick a tall defender with that option. But if you just look at like rankings and mock drafts at the moment, there's not a lot of key defenders around that range, which may mean we can trade back in later, say pick in the 40s to pick a project tall defender. It's not super sexy, but it may be more realistic than us, reaching for a key defender with 26. It is also entirely possible that we just sign one through delisted free agency. And again, you should have a video about that by the time this comes out, maybe tomorrow Perth time, actually. So anyway, let's crack into only our realistic options to trade into this year's draft. So what I'll do is eliminate some teams that there's just no hope to trade with us. So we have clubs like Port Adelaide and Melbourne just aggressively traded into this year's draft. The idea that they're going to trade out of it seems unlikely to me. I know Port Adelaide do hold 29, so they hold 13 and they hold 29 and 36. Could we target maybe 29 or 36, given they've still got their first rounder in 13? I suppose that's an option. Someone like a St Kilda would be tricky as well, because they want to trade in or trade up. It's a little unclear exactly what they want to do. They hold 7 and 8. There's been a little bit of a rumor they're trying to get higher than that. I think they went for West Coast pick 3, for instance, but it seems unlikely that they would just give up 7 or 8. But do they give up 32 later in the draft? It's possible, but not something that jumps off the page as being a real good target for us. Adelaide hold pick 4, that's it. After that, they've probably just got points for their father-son in Tyler Welsh. North have pick 2, and that's just about it, and they're looking to trade down. You've got the Lions, the Suns, and Essendon all traded back for points for different academy and father-son picks. What could happen is if, those clubs match all the players that they want to get out of this draft and they have some picks left over, they could trade one into the future with us. But that's very much a in-the-moment decision we'd have to make, and I'm not exactly sure how that would map out. There's also been some suggestion Essendon would try to trade back into this year's draft, so I reckon it'll be hard to get a deal done with them. Hawthorn and Geelong don't really hold anything in the first, nothing in the first 32 picks, either of them. They might be trying to trade back in themselves. Collingwood just have nothing before 55, and they don't even hold a first rounder next year, so they're out of the equation. And I suppose there's Fremantle, but they had 3 first rounders, they traded 2 of them, they got 1 left. The only way that I could see this working out is if they're happy to trade, say, their first rounder into the future. But again, that would probably cost us one of our first rounders, and I'm unsure if West Coast is willing to do that. And it would also give Fremantle a bit of a leg up with Chad Warner. Although I'm not 100% sure how that's going to play out, because it's not the team that has the most draft assets that gets the player. It's the club the player wants to play for. So maybe it doesn't really matter what Fremantle do. Either way, I do think that would be unlikely, but we do have, a couple of other options. The most obvious one, I think, to start off with is Richmond, who hold 1, 6, 10, 11, 18, 20, 23, and 24. So that's 8 picks, and I've been saying this across both my channels. There's a good chance they'd want to condense those. I'd say, if it were me, push 1 into the future and condense 2 picks to get higher in this year's draft as well. It takes 6 picks and hold extra picks next year as well. So I think that's a good strategy for Richmond to do rather than just go with the 8 picks they have, but that's personal opinion. So if they are at all open to that, they remain one of the biggest candidates for us. The only problem with that is every club is going to be thinking the same thing. Like I said, there's a number of clubs probably going to try and trade back into this year's draft, Essendon being one of them. I wouldn't be surprised if Geelong do. There's Hawthorn. St Kilda is another option there as well. So the issue there for us is that we would have to have the best bid. So unlike when you're trying to get a player, you don't really need to have the best draft picks to get a player. So bidding wars are a bit of a myth when it comes to players, but bidding wars 100% exist when trying to get draft picks off another club. If it's just picks for picks, we have got to have the best offer there. So this is a tricky one here. So I think the most realistic ones we could try and get from Richmond are probably going to be like 20, 23, and 24. And if we do that, then it's going to be hard to satisfy them. If we treat Hawthorn's future first that we currently have as kind of sacrosanct, we don't want to trade it because we're giving up that pick for Warner in an ideal world, in West Coast's ideal world. If they're unwilling to deal with what could be pick 12, then that leaves us with pick 21 next year. The tricky thing with that is I just think Richmond would get better offers than a pick in the 20s for a pick in the 20s. When you're trading into the present and in a stronger draft, you'll find that a lot of live trades are one-sided in terms of value. I seem to remember, I know this is Gold Coast, they're not a great example, but I think Gold Coast traded essentially what became pick 11 or pick 15 for pick 27 live. So a future first that became pick 15 got traded for 27. Carlton gave up 2 first rounders for like pick 18 once. Like when you're trading live, it is going to be expensive. So we have to bear all of these things in mind. We're probably going to cop another loss on value. So it depends. Are you willing to trade what could be pick 12 for like pick 20 in this year's draft? West Coast might feel that way. It really depends on, is it true that they're holding on to their future first to eventually trade it for Chad Warner? Again, the tricky thing with that strategy is in addition to what I said before about if you have too many assets, we're just going to basically hand them over. But further to that, there's a very real possibility we don't get Chad Warner and then we're holding picks in next year's draft when we could have had them in 2024, which is a strong draft. That being said, what I'll say is the West Australian talent pool next year is really strong. There's some really good WA talents, which is not really present in this year's draft. We've got Bo Allen and then not much else after that until maybe the 30s and 40s. So these are all things to consider. But you'd have to say Richmond leap off the page as one of the first teams we would look to try and do a deal with. But like I said, there's going to be so much competition for that. It might cost us a fair bit in terms of a value exchange. What about GWS? I've talked about this one previously. They've got 15, 16, 21, and 37. Now, I have no idea if they've got any motivation to trade into next year. They might be really happy with those picks. And again, 15, 16, and 21, as far as picks go, would probably cost us a Hawthorn future first to try and get that deal done at all. There's certainly the next team I would ask the question of, but maybe pick 37. If we say trade either of our second rounders for pick 37, GWS get a bit of an upgrade there, and it depends if they want to take their 4th pick. Then I'm not confident about this one, but the Western Bulldogs hold 17 and 25 in this year's draft. And I'd imagine if I were them, I would be trying to keep those picks. But technically, maybe that pick 25 is something that we could offer, dare I say it, a Hawthorn future first, which could be, let's say, 15 or something. And it could be better than that. It could be pick 10 for the Bulldogs pick 25. I don't think they would would let anyone touch their pick 17. I think they're right in a sweet spot of talent in this year's pool. That, getting that done would be really tough. So maybe 25 is more realistic. And again, it would just be expensive. And for where the Bulldogs are at, I think they want to hit this year's draft. Then there's Sydney. They hold 19 and 22 in this year's draft. So this might actually be more of a trade down option with pick 12. So this wouldn't involve trading any of our assets next year. It would just involve 12 for 19 and 22. That would give us the extra pick we're looking for. But it is gross. Like, I personally think, okay, 12 was a big jump from 3, and you could say that 12 to 19 is probably more justifiable, but to enter the draft at 19 would be horrendous. Personal opinion there, this is subjective, but this could be a fallback option that West Coast could look at if we absolutely fail to take any other picks from any other team this year's draft, or if we fail to get anyone trying to buy our future seconds, then this is another way we would at least get 3 decent picks plus Malachi, whereas currently we sit with 2. And Sydney have been one of those teams rumoured to want to trade 19 and 22 for an earlier pick. Apparently they were interested in Gold Coast pick 13 when it was with Gold Coast. It now is sitting at Port Adelaide. So I highlight it as an option, but it's certainly not plan A. But I suppose when you look at the fullness of that picture, I suppose I'm pretty pessimistic that we're going to have anyone want to do a deal with us. We are saying that now though, and things can change through the draft, and that's impossible to forecast, because you might get to a certain pick and say Richmond's targets might all be gone with their pick 24, and then suddenly Essendon's not as keen to get back into this year's draft. Like, there's all these different variables that could happen that open the door for us. But for me, there's just no clear solution here to getting back into this year's draft. Hopefully, if it costs us a late future second to get pick 40 and we take a decent talent, again, they say it's fairly even this year's draft, that might be the go. It's just not quite as sexy as maybe some of us are hoping. I don't think us trading into the first round of this year's draft is on the table at all for us personally. I'd be very surprised, and if it does happen, it's probably going to cost an arm and a leg. I've seen a little bit of a suggestion from Eagles fans about the prospect of trading 12 up into this year's draft, which again would not help us fill out the draft with more list spots or more draft picks. That would probably make it harder to get 4 decent players in. But for me, there would just be something gross about trading 3 down to 12 and then trying to trade up again. I'm someone who earns money in Australian dollars, and I live in England, right? So when I earn in Australian dollars, I've got to use an app to convert it into English pounds, British pounds, I should say. And it would be like me earning money, converting into British pounds, and then deciding I want Australian dollars again, and then trading it back into Australian dollars and copying 2 exchange rates. That's how it would feel to trade 12 up. So personally, I think that would be a gross outcome. That being said, if it gets us a gun player, I'd probably live with it, but I'm probably against us proactively looking for that right now. So yeah, that's just mapping out some of our options. Like I said, Richmond and GWS are probably the most obvious there. Sydney is a fallback, bearing in mind that the possibilities will open up once the draft starts and, we find out where bids are, and, Brisbane and say Gold Coast might have some picks left over we can trade with, and that's impossible to try and guess how that's going to play out. But I guess bottom line is I do want to trade back in. I'd probably be looking for a pick in the 30s or 40s, keep our first rounders. Those either get held for Chad Warner, or there's some good WA talent in the pointy end next year as well. Trading too aggressively into the early parts of this draft is going to be expensive, and I suppose on balance, I'm pretty pessimistic about our chances of getting a good deal done here. But let me know something I've missed. I certainly miss a lot of things all of the time, but let me know what you think in the comments, Eagles fans, and I'll see you in the next one.